I got an email from a student who's a former student, is probably about 27 years old now. And she said she heard Santa Claus was coming to town, Bruce's version, and it made her think of me. And she said, and I remember I was in your Jode class. I remember you named all your classes Bruce albums, and I was in Jode. Running to kids, and they still remember the name of their class, even if they're not Bruce fans. But I will say I converted 14-year-olds to become lifelong Bruce fans. In fact, I ran into one years ago in Philly, Citizens Bank Park. I heard somebody scream my name, and I was on my way to see a former student where I knew he was sitting, and this other former student told me it was his first Bruce show, and you want to know what show it was? The longest show on I think it was September 7th, 2016. Yeah, I texted him after the show and said, don't think they're all like this.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining tonight is a referral. I love when someone who's been a guest says, hey, I know someone you could talk to. So I have joining me today from the East Coast, Joni-Jean Crivello.
That is perfect. Spot on.
Yes. So, Joni, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting it.
Yeah. So, tell us a little about yourself. What's your elevator pitch?
My elevator pitch is 6th floor, please, because it's my favorite number. I grew up in a small town in Central Jersey, Middlesex Borough. It's 1 square mile. I had 28 whole people in my grade school classes. Catholic school most of my life. Dad owned the bar in town. Youngest of 3 girls. None of my sisters really care that much about music. Somehow I just got hooked. And then College of Massachusetts. Worked for a couple of years as a probation officer as a real youngin', which was hilarious because dealing with juveniles, and I wasn't much older than them, and led me to law school, which is where I met Jeff, who you have referred to. He's the one that referred me to you, and practiced law for a long time, but for the last 21 years, I've been an 8th grade teacher. I've had the honor of teaching young 8th graders American history and civics. Married, got 2 daughters. And that's me. Huge Yankees fan. I bleed Yankee blue.
Oh, very nice.
Hope that plays well in Texas.
Well, you know, we have the love of Bruce supersedes all sports allegiance. Right?
That actually leads me to one quick anecdote. Yeah. I was at a Yankees game. I don't know, more than 20 years ago, probably about 25 years ago, and I was in the 2nd tier. And I yelled down to the person I was with, oh my God, that's Bruce in the 4th row. How do you know? I said, I recognize that male pattern bald spot anywhere. And it was definitely him.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah.
I joke about, and I have had this people tell me that, like, I cannot believe I am friends with a Cowboy fan, right? So that we, you know, so we have, you know, so we'll talk a little Giants and Eagles, and then certainly Mets and Yankees, and my poor Texas Rangers are not doing well right now, so they had a horrible season.
Last season doesn't count though, so don't worry about that one bit.
Which is a perfect transition. How are you doing during? I've been asking all my guests, how are you doing these strange times?
I find it really hard to believe that it's been 9 months since Governor Murphy, shut us down the first time. And I will say pivoting to all remote learning, which we did for the last 3 months of the school year, was really tough.
Yeah.
It was very challenging from a technology perspective for the students and for me. But, you know, I think we moved them forward. I think that we had to just shift the paradigm as to what our goals were. So school has been, it's quite a challenge, but the kids make all of the effort worth it, and my colleagues are outstanding, and my administrators are terrific. As far as on a personal level, spent a lot of time at the beach this summer. It was a lot more crowded at the Jersey Shore with people not traveling.
Hmm.
And I have kept, only people I've kept in my bubble besides my husband are my daughters, Emma and Anna, and the boyfriends with whom they reside. And thank God for that, because I would have lost my mind if I did in the beginning when I stayed away from my children. And you being a dad, I'm sure you understand
I
how
I
tough that
to-
is for people.
I totally do, Joni. Last summer, not like 2019, my son was supposed to get married, and about
Mm,
4 or 5 weeks before the wedding, they
mm,
decided that maybe this was a bad thing. And so that was a very tough breakup. And so he moved home because they were living together.
mm-hmm,
And about, December, January, he started thinking, okay, I've been here 6, 7 months. It's probably time to start getting a place. And so he says, I'll kind of take it slow. And
mm-hmm.
then March happened and
Yeah,
everything shut down. And he said, I am so glad I didn't get my own place, because he said I would have packed everything up and come to your house. He says I
right.
wasn't going to sit in my apartment by myself.
No.
So it was awkward because my wife is retired, and so
Mm-hmm,
I spent half middle of March to almost the middle of May working from home. And so I was in the living room, my son was in the computer room where I am now, and my wife's like, I'm stuck in the bedroom. Like, what can I do? Because you guys are on con calls. Like, what can we do? So one of the things that got us through, Joni, was we made Trump COVID update bingo cards.
Okay.
And like he's going to say China, and had a and like and a
Mhm.
businessman praising Trump. And we and so about like at 4 we went happy hour. So we had tasty
Oh,
beverages, and we had our Trump uh
oh,
things,
brilliant.
and that became part of our ritual, doing that. So
And
well,
that is true. I will say that happy hour became a more frequent occurrence.
yes.
I mean, I had a similar experience over the summer, staying upstairs because my
Hmm.
husband was in outside sales and was on the road all the
Yeah.
time. And I let Chuck have the den, and I
Hmm.
just try to stay away as much as I could,
Yeah.
um, facilitate his business. But upwards the number of days that we've been in this situation. So it's 270 for we in New Jersey. Yeah.
So I want to get to Bruce in a minute,
Yeah.
but I
Hmm.
have to. I remember taking civics, and
Hmm.
I graduated high school in 1977.
Oh,
So
me too.
I'm older than dirt.
No,
Okay, so
no,
okay,
me. No, I'm sorry. That was college, but go ahead.
okay. See, all right. So I remember my freshman or sophomore year taking civics and learning a lot about the three parts of the government and a lot of things that it worked through. And I remember we had our PE coach was the civics teacher, but he talked a lot about. I remember sticking to this, that sometimes he was talking about, even though this senator had a lot of seniority in Louisiana, he said, I think sometimes it's good to, even though you lose the seniority, to get fresh blood representing your state. And I remember this. And Joni, do you feel like, and I'm putting you on the spot, do you feel like not enough school systems focus on civics the way they should?
I definitely feel that way. For a period of time, I was on the New Jersey, the State Commission for Social Studies. and with other social studies and U.S. history educators. And I thought that I did a lot, especially as an attorney, bringing that into the
Right.
classroom, and inspired me to do more. Civics education, as you know, has been under attack with this current administration.
Yes.
Real confusion as to what patriotism really means.
Right.
And I have strived for the last 2 decades to get my students to be independent thinkers, because it's very common to be in lockstep with
Right.
your parents. And that's fine, because your parents give you guidance and values, and they're right about almost everything, but just to understand why and not just be in lockstep. And it's like, oh, that's why my mom says so-and-so is a good
Right.
legislator. And just understanding the process. As an educator, you don't, of course, ever give an assignment without explaining why a student is doing something. It's not the days of rote when I was
Exactly.
there. Yeah, and to create lifelong learners and critical thinkers. It's interesting. One of the best teaching tools, I have 2 really tremendous teaching tools, and they'd be surprising, I think, to most people. One is a big, colorful map of the U.S. the former administrator sent over to me when I admired it on his office wall years ago. And I refer to it constantly when you're talking.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, kids don't know geography that well. And I still get a little confused when I get to past the Midwest. But the other is I have cardboard cutouts of the, well, now 45 presidents. And the last president, was after I purchased it. So that was just something a student actually printed Donald Trump and put it up there.
Mhm.
And I find the kids staring at it as we're talking about something else. And I always pause. I want to know, what are you looking at? What questions do you have?
Yeah.
They're fascinated by presidential history. And I was thinking today about, there are a lot of bad things that are going on right now, the litigation that we were talking about, for example, and what's being proselytized. But on the other hand, it's making my students aware of the Electoral College, even much more than just 2 words put together. And even though they don't understand it as well as adults do, or people that are political junkies like I am, it has much more meaning and resonates with them. So it's very interesting. So yeah. Civics is a long-winded way to say yes. Civics.
No, I appreciate the answer.
And it's as relevant to creating good citizens who will participate. If there's anything that came out of this election, in addition to the result, it's 150 million people plus that voted. That's wonderful and heartwarming to people who care about our nation.
All right, so you've already mentioned that your 2 siblings were not into music very much. But how about your mom and dad? Were they big music fans growing up?
My dad, it was a huge big band fan, especially Glenn Miller. I remember was one of his favorites, and Sinatra, of course, and I'm Italian. But music was a big thing. It was dad's music, and this is before FM radio. And my father passed away like 7 years ago, 6 years ago. He had the best memory and the best mind of anybody I've ever met. And even in his last few days, there's nothing that ever went in that wasn't still there. It's just truly amazing. So he could name every artist, their label, and the hits and who the singers were in the big band. And I'm not a big band fan, so it's not that, that carried on. But I will say that was the influence of music. I don't know. I think that I was born at a time, obviously, the Beatles when I was in elementary school.
Sure.
Okay? I remember Ed Sullivan, whatever. I was after Elvis, but I remember the Beatles. And we do have to acknowledge the anniversary yesterday of 40 years of John Lennon passing. My oldest sister received a gift at her grade school graduation, I guess it would have been. Yeah. And so I was probably in 3rd grade. And it was a AM radio that was shaped like the globe. It was a globe. And at the top was an airplane, and you turn that to tune it. And I would sneak into her room and take it from under her bed and listen to WABC in New York. And WABC at Christmas week, between Christmas and New Year's, would do a top 100 countdown. So, pop music, again, before FM radio. And I would write them down on loose leaf paper, and then you send your self-addressed stamped envelope in, and they would send you the pre-printed list, and counting down the top 10 songs of the year was such a big deal. I think that really had, the fact that music was in my house was one thing, but another thing I think really is that the time I was born, with the British invasion and the advent of rock and roll, emanating from R&B. I did
Yeah.
used to teach an enrichment class at school in the history of rock and roll, and we call them golf shots of teaching. And one of the most memorable golf shots is when a student would say, well, this was back in the CD era, so again, it's ancient history, that they would ask for a Bob Dylan compilation, because I used to do a segment with songs that tell a story, like The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Hurricane was the reason the boys especially, loved Bob Dylan, or playing Alice's Restaurant right before Thanksgiving, and the kids saying, oh, my dad and I listened to Alice's Restaurant. That's, I don't know why that mattered to me. Maybe civic should have mattered more.
No, I think it does. And
I name all of my classes after Bruce albums. In fact, just last night, I got an email from a student who's former student, is probably about 27 years old now. And she said she heard Santa Claus is Coming to Town, Bruce's version, and it made her think of me. And she said, and I remember I was in your Jode class. I remember you named all your classes Bruce albums, and I was in Jode.
Oh,
And I
how
love
fun.
it. I run into kids and they still remember the name of their class, even if they're not Bruce fans. But I will say I converted 14-year-olds to become lifelong Bruce fans. In fact, I ran into one years ago in Philly at Citizens Bank Park. I heard somebody scream my name, and I was on my way to see a former student where I knew he was sitting. And this other former student told me it was his first Bruce show. And you want to know what show it was? The Longest Show.
Oh,
American
nice.
soil. Yep. On I think it was September 7th, 2016. Yeah.
That
And that
is
was his
awesome.
first show. I texted him after the show and said, don't think they're all like this.
That's great.
Isn't it?
I as I said, I'm a few years younger than you. So I had the AM radio on all the time, and I do remember that during like Labor Day weekend, the top counting down the top hits, or like they would have the story of Elvis, like this over a holiday weekend, and they would do these things. So that's amazing. As you started going into high school, did your music start changing, your taste?
Yeah.
And
I will own up to owning Deep Purple albums. Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely. Yes, and things got a little harder, but on the other hand, I would put Bonnie Raitt on the turntable too.
Yes.
Oh, and I also I'll cop to Barbra Streisand albums. I love a great, strong voice. But yeah, I would say it morphed a bit. Led Zeppelin was really big back then, and it's not. I was a huge fan.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I was one of the Beatles versus Stones when I was growing up, and I definitely was Beatles. And while I recognized the prowess of the Stones, never really latched onto them.
That's interesting. I just did this week, as we're recording this, as you mentioned, it's December 9th. This will come out later, probably toward the end of the month or first part of January. But I talked to a couple of people about John Lennon's death, and I shared the story with both of them. Because I was raised in a very country music home, my cousins in Ohio could not believe that I could not name all four Beatles, like in the late '60s. I couldn't. I just now I could sing Loretta Lynn. I could sing Merle Haggard. I could sing Mel Tillis. Hank Williams. I knew all of them. And so it was very different to me. How did you discover Bruce?
Bruce, Born to Run was released when I was in college. And I was a subscriber to Rolling Stone, since high school. So you know about him from reading about him. You read the reviews. And I would say that I probably got hooked with Born to Run and not the first two albums. I did it backwards, like I think a lot of people probably do. And I had one roommate in college who was really into Bruce as well, and also into music. And she had a way of kicking the desk that the turntable sat on to make the stylus go back to the beginning of Born to Run. And we'd listen to it 100 straight times. She would just kick the side of the desk when the song was over.
That is a talent. That is awesome.
Yeah, Pam she had a lot of talents, and that was one of them. And Bruce did a couple of shows at the Music Hall in Boston around that time. Slept in line, didn't get tickets, understood then about the mad rush that would be torment and joy in my future.
Yes.
Working 3 phones, making my mother, staff her phone. Everybody had all my credit card, and all that stuff. But anyway, so that was disappointment, but it wasn't in a financial position to pay a scalper.
Right.
So that's when I met Bruce, and I remember, it's kind of embarrassing that I actually snottily said this, but I remember somebody in college asking me, who's Bruce Springsteen? And I remember my exact words were, "You never heard of Bruce Springsteen? He's the next Bob Dylan." And I am so embarrassed I said that. But I remember it. I remember saying it, even if it was 45 years ago.
Well, I have one better than you, Joni.
Okay.
I'm in Moss Bluff, Louisiana. It is a suburb of Lake Charles, and if Louisiana is a heel, a boot,
Right.
and Lake Charles is in the heel. And I was in a barber shop waiting to get my hair cut, and I do not remember if it was Time or Newsweek, but one of the magazines.
October
and
75.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I went, "Who's this? How can that be the greatest rock star? Have they never heard of Elton John? Have they never heard of Barry Manilow? Have you?" Because I was an AM radio kid.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. Bruce is not AM radio.
Yeah, I'd never heard of this guy. And what do you mean? And so, in a better world, the story would have been, "Oh, I need to find out what this guy is." I was like, this writer doesn't know anything.
Yeah.
And so
and here you are all these years later.
Yes.
This podcast is
Yes,
great.
Exactly.
What a great story.
Can you articulate why his music spoke to you? And I know that's a hard thing to do.
Well, you know what? What I have found maybe it's not unique to Bruce, but a shared Bruce experience is that you think your connection with his music is unique to you. And then you encounter other people, as a longtime subscriber of Backstreet's magazine and reading letters to Charles Cross in that magazine. And wait a minute, I've said that. Wait a minute, that's how I feel. So I think that the fact that it resonated for me, I learned, was a very shared experience. One thing that Bruce has done for all of us, so I won't make this about an I because it's really a we, is that you don't feel alone.
Yeah.
Even when you are. Because of Bruce, we're never alone. His words, and we didn't grow up the same exact way, even though we didn't grow up far apart in New Jersey. His remarks in the Broadway show, in addition to his lyrics, it was the only thing I can equate it with that I felt the same way as, I don't know if you've ever streamed Ricky Gervais's Afterlife BBC series. And other people say the same thing on Twitter. You follow Ricky Gervais on Twitter, that he gets the human experience in ways that nobody else does.
Right.
That's exactly what grief looks like. That's exactly what grief sounds like.
Yes.
And Bruce, you can say the same thing. And even if I don't have Bruce's experience, when he's talking about that late night drive or the closed factory, or you get it, you visualize it, you somehow connect it with your own personal experience. And I've said, and I know other people have said this, there are times that Bruce saved my life,
Yeah.
figuratively.
Well, a couple things to bring up, right, Joni, is
Mhm.
one, 5 years ago when I started doing this podcast, I just wanted to, I, I had, Lynette Carolla had done a few episodes where she talked to friends of her and Adam Carolla that were Bruce Springsteen fans. And she's
Okay.
a massive fan. And so they fanboyed stories about it. And I wish there was more. So, as I've said many times, in the spirit of lighting a candle instead of cursing the darkness, well, I'll just do it myself.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize is I was tapping into a community that I
Uh-huh.
didn't know existed.
That you didn't know you belonged to.
That's right. And
Mhm.
it is amazing. I've done now over 600 episodes, probably 400 or 500 interviews, and every story is unique, but there are so many tangents and similarities in the story
Uh-huh. Yeah.
that there is a universal. And
Yeah.
there is that sense of community that when you're sitting there listening to the music and sharing it, and the lyrics speak to you.
Right.
When you go see Blinded by the Light, the film, right? You're like,
Right.
I've been that kid.
Oh yeah.
And Linda said yes, and you were that kid obnoxious in your fandom till you learn to
Mhm.
bring it back. And I'm like, yes, I will embrace that. Yes, I have been that kind of fanatic. So I think that's beautiful said. Well said at all.
Thank
Um,
you.
you you've mentioned already a couple shows, so I preface
Uh-huh.
this. I do not believe the amount of times you've seen Bruce is a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. I think it depends on your age, your economic situation, where you live. There are
Right.
people that have been on the show that have seen him twice or never, that are
Right.
massive fans, and I've had
Yeah.
people that have seen him hundreds of times. But for
Yeah.
the record, do you know how many times you've seen
Yeah. 119.
him? Okay.
And I've kept it on my board for 21 years at school. And I still, and when I run into former students, they'll say, how many shows, what's the number on the board? And I would do that in Mariano Rivera Saves. And they sometimes think that the 652 was Bruce shows. I said, I wish. No, that's Saves. Um, and they remember, oh, when I was in 8th grade, the number was 54. I'm like, oh, that's quite a few tours ago. Yeah, and you're right. I've had the luxury of, I did 15 shows at the Meadowland. I'd go to 11 shows.
Right.
And I have the luxury of, living in New Jersey where people have an extra ticket, they think of me.
Right.
Yeah, so that's part of the reason. I used to always call Bruce my oceanfront home at the beach that I could have
Oh,
bought if I didn't spend so much
yes.
on tickets and with everyone. My first show
Okay.
was the River Tour.
Okay.
Um, Bruce, as you know, opened what was then called the Brendan Byrne Arena at the Meadowlands in North Jersey, July 2nd, 81. And in those days, you sent your check into, in an envelope, and you either got the thin check, the thin envelope, or the fat envelope back. And I got the thin one. They returned my checks. I didn't get tickets. So a friend of a friend had an extra seat in Philly, and on my first show was August 8, 81, the River Tour at the Spectrum, where Bruce, as you know, did his birthday show.
So,
In 99. Yeah.
so over the years, are there, and I know this is hard to do, are there shows that have stood out? Are there
Oh,
stories
absolutely.
you want to share with me
I
about?
got yeah,
Okay.
I definitely have a few. From that first show, the seminal moment was Point Blank with the lyric, the lights go out, and the lights went out. And then there was just a blue spotlight on Bruce, and it was chilling. I just got chills telling you it. That chilling feeling and that sense of community we were talking about that you get, that has lasted now for 40 years. Uh, I've had some, I told you that I was at the 2016 longest show, and I will say it was really hot in Philly that night, and I ruined it for myself for the last half hour because I kept looking at my watch. I knew, you know how you kind of know the set list, more so in more recent years than in old years. And I knew the Helsinki record, and I kept saying, he can do this, he can do, Bruce, keep talking, keep jamming, keep talking, you can do this. And I let myself get disappointed that it ended at 4:03, as opposed to enjoying every stinking click, tick of the clock.
So what's
But,
funny, Joni, is
but
I was not aware. There are things that there are debates and discussions, right?
yeah,
And I was talking to someone, and they're like, well, he didn't break 4 hours. It was 3 hours, 57 minutes. And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
that's four to me.
yeah,
Okay. I am the type that when I balanced my checkbook, if it got within $5 or $6, that's good. We're
good
moving
enough.
on. And they started explaining that, well, when do you hit time? When the first band member comes on, when Bruce
8:20.
comes on, is it the first time he says hello, and I'm like, okay, you guys are really overthinking this. And then
Oh,
someone explained to me that because radio shows back in the day when he did it,
oh,
it would start when you first heard his voice, right?
yeah,
So
good stuff.
I had the same thing sometimes because I had heard my first show wasn't until 2002, and I had heard these legendary hours, shows, and I'm like, that was not quite 3 hours, and instead of going, holy moly,
Yeah,
every
right,
other show is 90 minutes, including
right,
encore. But I was like,
right.
wow, he only did 3 hours. So I feel a
Yeah,
little bit of your pain.
yeah, exactly. Other shows that stood out, Jeff, who you spoke with, and I went to the first show of the outdoor portion of the Born in the USA tour. It was August 2nd, 85. It was at RFK in Washington. And Jeff had a connection. Somebody knew that worked at Ticketmaster. And we ended up at the second row. In fact, Ron Kovic was in front of us. So that was cool because it was Born in the
That's
USA.
very cool. Yeah.
And Jeff and I were kind of bratty at the end because he sent us home to Bobby Jean. And Jeff and I looked at each other, said, "We're not going home to Bobby Jean." And they were folding the chairs around us, and we were still upset, which is so stupid. But I drove 4 hours down to DC and 4 hours back. What Jeff labeled many years ago, happy tired. You go right to work. I was
Yes.
practicing law at the time, and who the heck cared? The shows that I was able to take my daughters. Emma has been to a couple of shows because she's 5 years older than her sister Anna.
Hmm.
But being able to take the two of them into Philly a couple of years ago and be able to share that with your children, as you can appreciate,
Yes.
is outstanding. Emma was a little girl and she memorized every word on the Greatest Hits album. I'd pick her up from preschool and we'd punch our fists through the T-top. Not really, it was a sunroof.
Yes.
Um, Other shows that were, well, the Christmas shows, you
Hmm.
know, uh, one was on my birthday in '03 in Asbury Park, and it snowed, and I drove through I think we got 8 inches of snow, and it's about an hour and a half from where I live to get to Asbury Park at Convention Hall. And then my friend Brian and I were at Harry's Roadhouse the following year. And man, that show was magical. It was warm going into the show. We got up to the amps. Um, it's Christmas, the energy. You're in this tiny, tiny bar.
Yeah.
And when they opened the doors and when we left and you're all sweaty, it was snowing. It
Oh,
was like a Hallmark movie. But
yes.
the shows were amazing. And the candy canes, I think I still have a couple of them that they throw at you. So the Christmas shows, I was very blessed because that only took place around here. And
Right.
to be able to attend those, that's really special too. Um, you remember, I think it was 2012 when they would do the ticket draw.
Yes.
Right. Well, I went with my friend Brian, and the number that they drew was 11. before our number. So
Wow.
we got up against the rail and, just again, that community. I remember these college kids, these kids that were a third of my age,
Hmm.
and they knew every lyric and every story. And it's just so wonderful. So I think those are probably what stands out more than anything. And the Broadway show, of course. I
I
mean,
was going to ask you, did you get a chance to go to Broadway?
yeah, I got, it was worth every penny of the $400 each tickets that my husband Chuck and I went to. And I will say that he's a fan. He's not as big a fan as me, he'd admit that. Um, and looked over a couple of times, and we both had tears streaming down our
Yeah.
cheeks. It was a religious experience, not a concert. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I still have not been able. Uh, my wife is not a fan. She is a casual fan at all,
Mhm.
um, but she watched him on the Tonys, where he did a little bit of My Hometown, right? And she goes, "Well, now I kind of am sad I didn't go with you." And so when it came out on Netflix, um, she watched the first 30 minutes, and he got to the point talking about his dad and all this, and Linda said, "This is too depressing. I can't watch anymore." And what's funny is, like, 5 minutes later, he says, "Okay, I'm going to get you off suicide watch. Let's talk about my mom." And I haven't convinced her yet to, like, okay, go back and watch this again, because I know she would like it once she got in there. She loved Letter to You. She loved the film. She loved the CD. Wrecking Ball is her favorite CD, because we listened to that a lot, and we drove up to Cleveland. That was her second show to see the Wrecking Ball tour, and so she loves that album. Um, but she was like, "Oh yeah, I'll watch Letter to You with you. I'll watch the documentary, sure." And she's like, "I really like this." She's got a little crush on Max. Joni and I were having so much fun that we kept on talking. So I'm dividing this episode into two parts. Come back on Thursday for the second half, where we talk a few more Bruce shows and her answer to the Mary question. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now who does, you can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.